The glass doors of First Republic Bank trembled as they were thrust open, the late autumn sunlight casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Michael Sullivan's weathered hands gripped his aluminum cane tighter, his Marine Corps ring gleaming dully under the fluorescent lights. 78 years of standing tall, from Key Sands battlefields to countless Little League championships, had taught him the importance of dignity under pressure. Today, that dignity was being tested. "Sir, I've explained 3 times now." The bank teller's voice carried across the hushed lobby, each word sharp and precise. "Without proper digital verification, we cannot access your account. The new security protocols are mandatory, no exceptions." She glanced nervously at her screen, where Michael's account of 34 years glowed behind red warning banners. Michael's arthritic fingers fumbled with his worn leather wallet, extracting a carefully preserved stack of documents. His military ID, Medicare card, and a dog-eared bank passbook that had recorded his financial life since 1989. The papers trembled slightly in his grip, not from age, but from a mounting frustration that threatened to crack his carefully maintained composure. "Miss, please." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had commanded both troops and young athletes. "I've banked here every Thursday for 3 decades. Sarah Martinez used to handle my transactions. She knew my face, my history. My wife, Patricia." His voice caught for a moment. "Her new cancer medication needs to be picked up before Anderson's pharmacy closes at 5. It's right there in my account, money I earned serving this country." The scattered documents on the counter told only fragments of his story. Mortgage payments made faithfully through recession and recovery, regular deposits from his pension, withdrawals that had put dozens of underprivileged kids through baseball camps. Each piece of paper represented a chapter in a life dedicated to service, yet none could satisfy the bank's new digital requirements. Through the bank's floor-to-ceiling windows, pedestrians began to slow their pace, phones appearing in hands as the scene inside drew attention. The other customers shifted uncomfortably. Some averted their eyes while others watched with growing indignation. A young mother pulled her Little League uniformed son closer, whispering something that made the boy look at Michael with wide, uncertain eyes. "That's quite enough." A security guard stepped forward, his badge catching the light. "Sir, if you can't complete the digital verification process, we'll have to ask you to leave." His hand moved toward Michael's elbow, but stopped short. Something in the old Marine's posture, perhaps a whisper of battlefield steel beneath the civilian years. The fluorescent lights caught the tears that Michael refused to acknowledge, each drop a silent betrayal of his composure. His cane tapped a military rhythm against the marble floor as he gathered his scattered documents, each movement deliberate, measured, masking the tremor in his hands. The security guard hovered nearby, torn between protocol and respect. "My wife's oncologist changed her medication this morning," Michael explained to no one in particular, his voice carrying the weight of battles fought far from any battlefield. $486. "The pharmacy closes at 5. He checked his watch, a gift from his last Little League team, engraved with words now worn nearly smooth. "To Coach Sullivan, who taught us more than just baseball." Jennifer Parker, the newly appointed bank manager, watched from her glass-walled office. At 32, she'd fast-tracked through Stanford Business School into National Financial Group's executive program, earning this position just 3 months ago during the merger. Her reputation for efficiently implementing new security protocols had made her a rising star in the company. Now, watching the scene unfold, she felt the weight of policy and humanity colliding in her lobby. Outside, the autumn wind whipped a few fallen leaves against the bank's windows, their scratching a quiet counterpoint to the low murmur of displeasure building among the customers. The digital clock above the teller counter clicked forward, each minute bringing Patricia Sullivan's medication deadline closer. While somewhere in the vast digital architecture of modern banking, Michael Sullivan's lifetime of trust had been reduced to a series of unmet authentication requirements. As Michael Sullivan stood outside the bank, the scattered papers at his feet traced a life's journey that no digital algorithm could comprehend. His military discharge papers, yellowed with age, bore the marks of valor from Vietnam. Beside them lay decades of Little League roster sheets, each name representing a young life he'd helped shape on the dusty diamonds of hope he'd built in their struggling community. "Sir, you need to clear the entrance," the taller security guard announced, his voice echoing off the glass facade. Michael's hand instinctively tightened around his cane, muscle memory from years of standing his ground under fire. The autumn wind kicked up, sending a medical prescription slip dancing across the concrete. Patricia's new chemotherapy regimen, the paper's crisp edges bearing the weight of urgency that no one inside seemed to grasp. Through the bank's windows, he could see Jennifer Parker's slim figure moving through her glass office, her tablet clutched like a shield against the human drama unfolding in her lobby. At 32, she'd arrived 3 months ago with the merger, bearing degrees from Stanford and a reputation for digital transformation. Her morning email from corporate still burned in her inbox. 0 exceptions to security protocols. Violations will result in immediate management review. Inside, the lobby had become a theater of whispered commentary. An elderly woman in a Red Sox cap shook her head, clutching her pearls as she muttered, "This isn't right. That man coached my grandson Tommy. Taught him more about life than baseball ever could." Nearby, a middle-aged man in a business suit lowered his phone, recognition dawning. "Wait, that's Coach Sullivan. He ran the Veterans Youth Program. My kid brother wouldn't have made it through high school without him." The murmurs grew, a tide of community memory rising against corporate policy. Through the glass, phones captured the scene. An elderly Marine veteran, denied access to his own money earned through decades of service both in uniform and out. The story was already spreading across local Facebook groups, next-door communities, lighting up with indignation. The medication, Michael's voice cracked slightly as he tried explaining to the younger guard, whose name tag read Jason. "Patricia's been fighting this battle for 18 months. The new treatment, it's our last good chance." His fingers trembled as he showed Jason the prescription, the price circled in harsh red ink. $486. Jason's stern expression wavered. He'd seen Michael here before, remembered him nodding hello every Thursday, always carrying a baseball cap in summer, always asking about Jason's kids. But policy was policy, and his job depended on enforcing it. Inside her office, Jennifer Parker pulled up Michael's account history on her sleek monitor. 34 years of impeccable banking. Mortgage payments that never missed a beat, even during the 2008 crisis. Regular deposits from his military pension. Withdrawals that matched perfectly with Little League season starts, often followed by deposits from grateful parents who could finally afford to let their kids play. "Miss Parker," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Channel 7 is on the line. They're asking about the situation with Mr. Sullivan. Apparently, someone uploaded a video." Jennifer's tablet trembled slightly in her manicured hands as she watched the view counts climbing. The scene outside had drawn a small crowd. A teenager in a varsity jacket recognized his former coach, quickly tapping out a message to his teammates. 2 Vietnam vets, their caps bearing unit insignias, stopped to speak with Michael, their faces darkening as they learned the situation. One pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen as he contacted the local VFW post. "Coach Sullivan?" A young woman pushed through the gathering crowd, her press badge catching the light. "I'm Sarah Chun from the Herald. My brother played for you in 15. Would you mind telling us what's happening here?" Michael straightened his shoulders, years of military bearing taking over. "I'm just trying to access my own money," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion building behind it. "My wife Patricia needs her medication. We've banked here for 34 years, but now they say I need something called 2-factor authentication and a smartphone app." He gestured to his simple flip phone, a model that belonged to an era when trust was built on handshakes and looking a person in the eye. The crowd's phones captured every word, every tremor in his voice, every detail of this collision between digital progress and human dignity. Inside, other customers had begun closing their accounts, each withdrawal a quiet protest against a system that had forgotten the face of community banking. "Corporate policy requires full digital verification," Jennifer recited to herself, watching the scene through her office windows. Her own father, not much younger than Michael, still struggled with his smartphone. How many times had she patiently walked him through app installations, password resets, authentication codes? The irony wasn't lost on her. Her rapid rise through the ranks had been built on implementing the very systems that now stood as barriers to people like Michael Sullivan. The digital clock on her wall clicked relentlessly toward 5 p.m. Each minute that passed was another minute closer to Anderson's pharmacy closing, another minute of Patricia waiting at home for medication she desperately needed. The system that was designed to protect people like Michael had become the very thing threatening his family's well-being. Outside, the autumn sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the bank's modern glass facade. The growing crowd of supporters cast even longer shadows, their presence a testament to a lifetime of quiet service that no digital algorithm could quantify, no security protocol could authenticate. The late afternoon sun caught the chrome finish of a Tesla Model X as it pulled into the bank's parking lot. Tom Brady stepped out, his 6 feet 4 inches frame casting a long shadow across the gathered crowd. His daughter Vivian, clutching her iPad, tugged at his sleeve as they approached the bank's entrance. "Dad, look," Vivian whispered, her 10-year-old eyes fixed on the elderly man sitting on a bench near the bank's side entrance. Michael Sullivan's shoulders were shaking with quiet sobs, his weathered hands still gripping both his cane and the prescription paper like lifelines. Brady paused, his decades of reading complex situations on the field kicking in. The crowd's energy, the phone's recording, the security guard's nervous postures. Something significant was unfolding. A few scattered papers lay at Michael's feet. Military discharge papers, bank statements, and what looked like old baseball lineup cards spilling from a worn leather wallet. "Sir, are you all right?" Brady's voice carried that same calm authority that had commanded huddles through 7 Super Bowl victories. People in the crowd began to notice who had arrived, phones swiveling to capture this unexpected development. Michael looked up, hastily wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. That ingrained military dignity still evident despite his situation. "I'm sorry," he managed, trying to gather his scattered documents. "It's just my wife Patricia. She needs her medication. The new cancer treatment, and they won't." His voice cracked as he gestured toward the bank's entrance. Vivian was already kneeling, helping collect the fallen papers. She picked up a faded photograph, a baseball team picture from the local youth league's championship season. "Dad, look at this," she said, studying the image. "The Sullivan Veterans Youth League. They were talking about this program at school last week for our community service project." Brady's expression shifted as the pieces connected. He'd heard about this program, a legendary local initiative that had used baseball to help veterans' kids cope while their parents were deployed. The stories about the retired Marine who'd dedicated his retirement to ensuring no military child felt alone, who'd worked multiple jobs to keep the program running, who'd become a second father to hundreds of service members' children. They were all about this man. "Mr. Sullivan," Brady said, extending his hand. "I've heard about your program. Didn't you help coach Martinez's son when he was struggling after his dad's deployment?" The mention of the former Patriots assistant coach created an immediate connection. Through his tears, Michael explained the situation, the new digital verification requirements, the medication deadline, his wife waiting at home. Each word seemed to weigh heavier than the last. 34 years of banking here," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now they treat me like I'm nobody because I can't use their smartphone app." Vivian was already on her iPad, her young fingers flying across the screen as she read through the bank's online policies. "Dad, this isn't right," she said, her voice carrying that youthful certainty of justice and injustice. "Look at their own policy exceptions for long-term customers and medical emergencies." Brady had already made his decision. Having lost his own mother to breast cancer years ago, the mention of cancer medication struck a deeply personal chord. He'd since served on the boards of several major banks, understanding both the necessity of security and the importance of human judgment. "Mr. Sullivan, let's go back in there together," he said, helping the elderly Marine to his feet. "Sometimes people need a reminder that behind every policy there's a person." As they walked toward the bank's entrance, the crowd parted respectfully. Phones continued recording, social media buzzing with this unexpected development. The NFL legend, the young girl, and the elderly Marine coach, an unlikely trio united by circumstance and compassion. Jennifer Parker, who had been watching the scene unfold through her office windows, felt her carefully constructed world of corporate protocols begin to shift. The man walking through her lobby wasn't just Tom Brady, the NFL legend, but also Tom Brady, the businessman, known for his strategic investments in technology companies and his advocacy for balanced digital transformation. The bank's lobby fell silent as they approached. Brady's presence seemed to fill the space, not just physically, but with an aura of purpose that had won him those 7 rings. "Miss Parker," he called out, his voice carrying the same intensity that had commanded stadiums. "I believe we need to have a conversation about what banking really means to a community." Vivian, still recording on her iPad, captured the stark contrast between her father's Apple Watch and Michael's worn flip phone, a visual metaphor for the digital divide that had created this crisis. The tension in the room was electric as Jennifer emerged from her office, tablet in hand. "Mr. Brady," she began, her corporate training evident in every measured word. "While I appreciate your concern, there are federal regulations that we simply cannot dash." "Let me stop you right there," Brady interrupted, his tone firm but diplomatic. "I serve on the boards of 3 financial institutions. When you talk about federal regulations, I know exactly what they say and what they don't say." He pulled out his phone, bringing up the Federal Banking Commission's guidelines. "Show me where it says we must deny an established customer emergency medical funds because they don't have a smartphone." The other bank employees had gathered at the periphery of the scene. Their usual Monday afternoon transformed into something that felt more like a pivotal moment in their institution's history. Brady was both judge and jury, his reputation in both sports and business lending weight to every word. "You're wasting precious time while a computer tells you to ignore 34 years of trust," Brady continued, his voice dropping to that same intense tone that had inspired countless fourth-quarter comebacks. "Every minute we stand here arguing about apps and digital signatures, there's a woman waiting for medication she needs to live." Jennifer Parker's tablet trembled slightly in her grasp, the red warning banners on her screen suddenly seeming less like corporate mandates and more like arbitrary barriers. Through her office's glass walls, she could see the growing media presence outside. Local news vans pulling up, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky. "Here's what's going to happen," Brady said, his voice carrying the calm authority that had led countless game-winning drives. "We're going to help Mr. Sullivan access his money today, right now, and tomorrow you're going to review every policy that puts digital convenience above human dignity." He paused, letting his next words carry the weight of both his business acumen and public influence. "Because if you don't, I'll personally help Coach Sullivan transfer every penny to a bank that remembers what community means." The threat wasn't just in his words. It was in the hundreds of phones recording outside, in the news van's lights now flooding the lobby, in the viral story of a beloved Marine veteran being denied access to his wife's cancer medication because he couldn't navigate a smartphone app. The bank's carefully crafted image of digital innovation was crumbling in the face of human reality. Vivian, still recording on her iPad, had pulled up the bank's public relations history. "Dad," she whispered, her young voice carrying in the hushed lobby. Their last commercial was all about banking with a heart and serving those who served. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Jennifer looked down at her tablet, then at Michael's passbook, then at the imposing figure of Tom Brady standing between her and business as usual. The clock on her wall read 4:43 p.m. Patricia Sullivan's medication deadline loomed, and in this small bank branch in Massachusetts, the future of banking itself seemed to hang in the balance. "Mr. Sullivan." Jennifer's voice carried a new note of humanity as she made a decision that would later be cited in banking industry journals and social media case studies. "Let's process your withdrawal right now. I'll implement the emergency override protocol and take full responsibility." Her fingers moved across her tablet, bypassing the digital barriers that had seemed so impenetrable moments before. As Michael's transaction was being processed, Brady noticed something familiar in the old coach's wallet. A baseball card, carefully preserved in plastic. "Is that Carl Yastrzemski's autograph?" he asked, genuine interest in his voice. Michael nodded, a brief smile breaking through his worry. "Got it the day I started the Veterans Youth Program. He came down to help launch our first season." "The Red Sox legend?" Vivian's eyes widened. She'd been learning about Boston's baseball history in school. "Dad, didn't you say he helped inspire you to consider baseball before football?" Brady's deep laugh filled the office, breaking the remaining tension. "Sure did. Almost went for baseball before settling on football. The discipline, the strategy, baseball teaches you life lessons that stay with you forever." He turned to Michael. "Just like you've been teaching those lessons to military kids all these years." Jennifer watched this exchange, a genuine smile replacing her earlier professional mask. The transaction was processing, but something more important was happening. She was witnessing the human side of banking that no digital algorithm could quantify. By 4:51 p.m., Michael had his funds. The elderly Marine turned to Brady, his eyes glistening. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Patricia, she's all I have left, and this medication." He clutched the bank envelope tightly. Brady shook Jennifer's hand firmly. "Thank you for doing the right thing," he said, his tone both gracious and meaningful. "Sometimes the biggest plays in life happen off the field." Jennifer nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his sports metaphor. As they walked toward the bank's entrance, Brady made a quick stop at the ATM. Without fanfare, he withdrew some cash and pressed it into Michael's hand. The old Marine started to protest, but Brady raised a hand. "Consider it an investment in the future of baseball," he grinned. "The kids in your program might produce the next Carl Yastrzemski." The crowd outside had grown, but they parted respectfully as Michael emerged, walking tall despite his cane, his dignity restored. Brady's presence had transformed what could have been a story of corporate coldness into one of community triumph. Jennifer watched from the bank's entrance as Brady helped Michael into his Tesla, Vivian already planning to visit the Veterans Youth Program next week for her school's community service project. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, but for the first time that day, they didn't seem threatening. As Brady's Tesla pulled away, Jennifer turned to her staff. "Tomorrow morning, first thing," she announced, "we're creating a new protocol. Digital security doesn't have to mean losing our humanity." She paused, watching Michael's figure through the car window. "And get me everything we have on the Veterans Youth League program. I think it's time First Republic remembered what community banking really means." Inside the Tesla, Michael finally looked at his watch, the one his last Little League team had given him. 4:57 p.m. They would make it to Anderson's pharmacy in time. Patricia would get her medication. In the driver's seat, Brady was already making a call to his investment team about establishing a fund for digitally disadvantaged veterans. "You know, Coach," Brady said as they pulled up to the pharmacy, "sometimes the best plays aren't the ones we practice. They're the ones where we just do what's right." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the story of what happened at First Republic Bank that afternoon was already spreading across social media platforms. Vivian's iPad video, showing the stark contrast between digital innovation and human compassion, had gone viral. But the real story wasn't just about one veteran's struggle or one NFL legend's intervention. It was about something deeper stirring in America's consciousness. "You see that, sweetheart?" Brady said to Vivian as they drove home after ensuring Michael and Patricia had everything they needed. "Sometimes the biggest championships aren't won on any field." His daughter nodded, clutching her iPad where comments were pouring in from across the country. "My father's a World War II vet, 96 years old. Went through the same thing last month. Who's protecting our greatest generation? At veteransdaughter_MA. Been banking 50 years. They want me to do everything on a phone I can barely read. What happened to looking someone in the eye? At Grandpa Joe_1942. I'm a bank manager in Texas. Tomorrow, I'm reviewing all our elderly customer policies. Change starts with us. At Banking with Heart." The incident had sparked a national conversation. News channels picked up the story, running headlines that captured the zeitgeist. "Digital divide. When banking innovation leaves Americans behind." Brady's greatest play. NFL legend champions veterans' cause. Banking's human face. How one branch manager changed her bank's future. Jennifer Parker spent that evening rewriting her bank's elder care protocols. Her report to corporate began with words that would later be quoted in banking industry journals. "In our rush to embrace the future, we must not forget those who built our present. Digital security and human dignity are not opposing forces. They are complementary values that define modern banking's true mission." The story's ripple effects continued to spread. The American Banking Association announced a task force on elderly banking accessibility. 3 major banks launched digital bridge programs for senior citizens. The Veterans Administration began developing a simplified banking authentication system. Local high schools started Tech Buddies programs pairing students with elderly community members. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened in smaller, quieter ways. At Anderson's pharmacy, the pharmacist now kept a list of elderly customers who might need extra time with their banking. At First Republic's local branch, Jennifer instituted community banking hours, where senior citizens could conduct business with additional personal assistance. The Veterans Youth League saw a surge in volunteers, many inspired by the viral video of its founder's dignity in the face of adversity. A week later, Michael Sullivan stood on the baseball diamond where he'd coached for 3 decades. The evening practice had a few special guests: Tom Brady throwing pitches, Vivian keeping score, and several bank employees volunteering as assistant coaches. Patricia, feeling stronger after her new medication, watched from the bleachers, her smile as warm as the setting sun. "You know what I learned from all this?" Brady said to the gathered young players, mostly children of deployed service members. "Your coach here taught me something no playbook ever could. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't about following rules, they're about changing them when they stop serving people." The story might have ended there, but it didn't. Instead, it became a beginning for banks to re-examine the human cost of digital transformation. A beginning for communities to bridge the technology gap between generations. A beginning for corporations to remember that behind every policy stands a person. As evenings settled over the baseball diamond, Michael watched his newest team practice. Children of veterans learning not just about baseball, but about standing up for what's right. His phone buzzed, the old flip phone he still carried with pride. A text from Jennifer. The bank's new senior citizen program would launch next week, named in his honor. The future of banking would still be digital, but perhaps now it would also be more human. Because sometimes the greatest innovations aren't technological at all. They're moments of human connection that remind us why we created all these systems in the first place. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a veteran who needed access to his bank account. It was about America itself, about how we treat our elders, how we balance progress with compassion, and how sometimes the most important updates to our system aren't written in code, but in the unchanging language of human dignity. Your turn to share. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Have you or someone you know faced similar challenges with digital banking? What solutions do you think banks should implement to better serve elderly customers? How can communities better bridge the technology gap between generations? Share your story in the comments below. Together, we can ensure that in our rush toward the future, we don't leave behind the very people who helped build our present.